insist that we need global certification, but I also think that until the WiMAX forum is stood up over the next 12 months, you'll still see Clearwire participating at carrier level certification. After about 12 months, it should be predominantly WiMAX forum unless you're integrating into our back-end system.
A couple other just kind of facts I want to share with the group. So we have in the markets that were launched a Mondi device from Samsung, and we have the service plan for that is $35 a month for unlimited tonnage and usage. And if you're willing to limit yourself to 2 gigabytes, which is still a lot, it's $25 a month. And then the question comes, how open is your device? And our devices all of our devices are as open as any of your ISPs provide. So there is no walled garden concept. There's no concept about being on our deck or in our vending machine or what have you. And then lastly, the question that we frequently get is coverage. And so we're going to have 100 million people under coverage by the end of next year. We're launching markets this year in Philadelphia, Chicago, and just look for our presence. Thank you.
And pick two. We have a plan that if you have a home modem from us, let's say it's $35, and you want to add a mid to it, it's another $15. So for $50, you are getting rid of both a $60 plan here and Comcast or Fios at home. For $50, you're replacing a $60 service plan and a $40 service plan at home. So an incremental cost of $15 to add, whether it's your car, a Mondi, or a laptop. That's the kind of plan you can see us going with going forward. And I think that $15 is closer to the sweet spot of a mobile internet device.
This is a very unusual position. When I've done these before, it's usually some long-winded presentations by vendors, and we have about 5 minutes for Q&A. We actually have a lot of time, so we can get a lot of debate going here. And let me take a question in the back first.
Most of us travel with at least one handful of devices when we're mobile. How do we see the mobile executive or whatever you want to call us having in our kit bag when we travel 18 months from now? You know, do we still have to have a dozen devices with us? And how many chargers do we need and all that other good stuff? What's going to happen?
Why don't we start at the end, and maybe each of you guys can take a cut at it. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is, of course, it depends. I mean, it depends on what you're doing. Our company makes the BlackBerries, right? But do we make? Is this our product? Absolutely not. This is just the way our service is delivered. We have our own network. We're secure end to your server, not end to end. We will be, and in fact, we're the only network that is certified by 8 different global security organizations, including, by the way, Canada, which is last, and that's where we're located. But U.S. government, German government, and so on, United Nations. But you can have custom applications. This opens up the door for, say, medical applications, which we're doing and seeing more of those. So, like I say, it depends on what you're doing. Another aspect is that when you get data, we use about 7% of the capacity of a network compared to the other devices like the iPhone and so on, because we compress everything about 8 to 1. In other words, we have either lossless compression for text and that kind of data, or like a puncturing, like a picture. It's a smart puncture. You know, we don't just go puncture bits out like crazy. We puncture smartly so that you got something that's designed for a large screen like this, and just remove like 90% of them, and it looks totally fine on a screen like that. But I guess it depends on what you're gonna do. If you're gonna create content, or for example, sometimes I wish I had the availability of doing a spreadsheet without bringing a computer. But then on the other hand, when I travel, I don't take any confidential material.
Yeah.
So it depends on what you want.
I think Mark's point early on, it may depend a lot on your profession. So I happen to have a brother-in-law who's a doctor. He has an iPhone and a BlackBerry. BlackBerry for security because of what he's communicating in a lot of cases. And if you work for a police force or the government, it is the only secure approved. It's the only NSA approved, encrypted device to send certain types of data. So you may be restricted to have a certain type of a device. But in other cases, it's a question of how much functionality can we cram into these devices. And that's a great question, because I know Mark's wrestled with Okay, you want a third antenna in the phone? You want to do near-field communications? You want to do Zigbee? Well, what do you want to get rid of? You want to get rid of the camera?
Take your GPS out?
Yeah, it's a fixed bag, right? So you got to start making trade-offs into how much you can cram into this small device.
Well, another thing, I mean, you're talking about the incremental cost of adding adding WiMAX to something is $25. That's only if you don't have anything in there to begin with. Adding WiMAX to this is prohibitive. It's prohibitive because I can show you. We have four antenna. We have a 4-band antenna here. We have 2 antennas there for WiMAX. I mean for Wi-Fi. We have one up here for GPS. We'll have 700 megahertz. We've got to add. We have 1710. We have to add 2110. We have to add, and 2500 or 2690. I mean, where are we going to put these things? And there's matching RF sections that have got to go in there. So it's not just antennas. And those little cables, they're like $5 a piece. You know, and you need like 6 of them. So it's not, it's not really that straightforward.
Compared to adding a $120 CDMA chip to something, though, and $25. $25 is going to be about 10. So what I would say, first of all, I'm going to second everything that Mark just said.
That was your picture, by the way. So.
I'm going to second
exactly
everything that Mark just said. That in 18 months, the difference is not going to be about the hardware you carry. The difference is 18 months from now, WiMAX chips, and again, I'm saying it is a mobile internet, are probably going to be closer to $10 to $12, depending on the success of some industry things, which is approaching ABGNN, right? So I see ABGNN chips in a lot of things down to about $250, maybe N starts to not go into under $200. So the question is, if the network's covering most of the United States, certainly all of the NFL cities, when I say all, I mean like 40 by 40 square miles in Atlanta. I'm talking 50 by 40 miles in Los Angeles. I'm talking huge sections. If that happens, what do the device manufacturers do? Because I, as a user, I'm going to be less tied to my hardware. I would argue that in 18 months, this is going to be like buying that big console TV, getting the family around on a Sunday night and listening to radio. Okay? The networks can do so much more than what the devices allow them to do today. So the questions are, what do we do on the application side to become, cloud computing starts to become real when the internet is everywhere. So what are the device manufacturers going to do in all these various industries to take advantage of those capabilities, to take advantage of the network and create content that's more cloud-based?
So how long do you think till we get to a $10 chipset cost?
I'd say 2011 is the pivotal year. The tipping point is going to break in 2011. We work with all the major manufacturers. The top 100 technology brands, I've personally sat down with the CTOs and VPs of R&D and design and talking about these level discussions with at least 50 of them. And I can tell you at the beginning of 2011, we'll have 120 million POPs covered. At the end of 2011, I'm not going to go on the record, but I will tell you that the fastest moving people in the industry, companies that rhyme with Pony, will make commitments prior to the beginning of 2011. Companies that drag their feet and would rather enter market 6 months too late rather than one day too early, companies that rhyme with, FP, will make a commitment by the end of 2011. Major commitments. So in 2011, you'll have the early movers in and the late movers in, and a fairly mature network that covers most of the United States. That's us.
Okay. Do you have anything to add to that, Sean?
I would circle back to the price points, and it gets back to if you're paying $60 or $50 for every single device that's connected, it's a showstopper.
Right.
If we kind of got religion on that, and we give discounts because we believe it's good for the consumer and also makes it very sticky, and that if we have 4 WiMAX devices that you're carrying, that's a good thing for us, and it's probably going to be more like 70 instead of 250. So that I think will help catalyze and change the dynamics.
How much of the MIDs or the UMPCs are called the non-traditional, smartphone up to PC crowd? Do you expect to be enterprise purchases versus individual purchases that are subsidized?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that the MID is primarily a consumer product. So I don't see, we already have laptops. We'll have netbooks for people who are really cost, conscious in that subject. Right. The enterprise market already has. So
it's more of a luxury that somebody decides they want an extra device.
It's a luxury, but if the price is low enough, it's not, as much of a luxury. Luxury cell phones were luxuries like in the early 90s. Now they're kind of, every high school kid has them, in LA. So if the service plan is down to $15 or $20 a month, they'll be everywhere. if they cost $150 to $200 for the device, the service plan is, $15 or $20, or you can juggle with the math and put them on a subsidy contract and make the device free, but maybe it's $25 a month. You start cracking the consumer market with those kind of numbers.
Great. Questions? Yeah, Carl?
Well, let this jump.
Oh, go ahead.
I had two, but I'll only ask one right now.
Go ahead.
So with all the capability as you move to the cloud, there's a secondary user, and that is, as you kind of indicated, a parent and a teenager. So you have the teenager has the capability, the teenager is the end user, but there's this other secondary user that uses the technology for tracking, their kids, or maybe their inventory of the trucks across the, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so is there, are there products or is there a vision where the secondary user will come into these technologies and say, well, especially I guess GPS is the leader technology in this area, but there are others.
So there's, I think your suggestion is there kind of a halo effect or
Yes.
a hub effect where, the one purchase is going to drive several other purchases to be networked together.
Right.
So
Guys
I'm
wanna
going
take
to go
that
back
one?
to the previous question, which is, it's hard to speak of these things in generalities. It's better to speak of tablet PCs in the enterprise as telehealth, military, public safety. Where do people, field force automation, people who carry rugged, blah, blah, blah. So rather than answer generally what percentage of the overall, it's better to answer more specifically. So I'll give you an example of a third-party stakeholder in a connected car. The car is a probe car. Driving down the road, I hit black ice. My car triggers anti-skid, and it communicates it out to the cloud. So the guy who's a quarter mile behind me subscribes to a service, not necessarily from the carrier, or from the hardware. Maybe it's the car that manufacturer who's now signed up for some kind of service that takes anti-skid information and communicates it out. But regardless of who the company is providing the service, the car behind me now knows there's black ice, something you can't do today.
Hopefully the latency is less than a few milliseconds.
Exactly.
So I think that there's a lot of opportunities. I think you just have to go on a case-by-case basis. There's GPS and tracking don't line well with mobile internet unless it's cellular because of the coverage. I think it aligns better with satellite, and we see GPS and satellite tracking really well in telematics. We're doing a machine-to-machine talk later that kind of talks about that. So rather than talking generalities, I think it's better to say in communication and entertainment to juveniles, what's the third-party effect? To the car, what's the third-party effect? To these other things, it's easier to do that than it is to talk in generalities.
Here's an interesting, some interesting data for you. I think this will be a pretty big force. I just noticed that in the U.S., 10% of landline users have disconnected their phones. At this rate, within the past few years, if you just do a simple regression analysis on it, that by 2025, no one's going to have a phone in the U.S. I mean, there will be a few, but that's going to put a lot of people out of work, and it's going to change the game. So, I mean, that may help answer the question of user adoption. You'll have a ton of people coming off of this landline.
Yeah, and I mean, it took, 911 or E911, a few other things to break down some of the barriers to say, is my cell phone an acceptable,
Right.
rock solid form of communication, right? So that's true. It's definitely going to change it. Carl?
Scott, you said a stat about the 50% of the netbooks being acquired were being acquired in Europe. In Europe, were being acquired through the carrier. I'm wrestling with what's the lessons there, and particularly, is there a SIM card interface embedded in there already, or is it through a dongle or a USB stick that they're giving a rebate? Because in the U.S., I'll just tell you my anecdotal evidence. Sprint offered the 1 cent netbook, and it sounded like an amazing deal. And we went down to the Best Buy to go to buy it, and the Best Buy guys had it locked up in a cage. It took them basically 30 minutes to find the key and to help us get to the point where we could actually test the thing out. And I just sat there and said, well, so much for retail being the outlet for this. So I'm curious as to what the lessons are in Europe and how it's happening.
So, yeah, and that wraps into the business model question. So is this going to be, predominantly a carrier distribution model or another form?
Why don't you talk to that?
Well, I talk too much, but this is my wheelhouse, right? I mean, so the problem isn't the activation in the store. Problem isn't the $200 plus you have to pay Best Buy to get on their shelf and to train them to do the activation, because they won't let the customer do the activation because then they won't get paid, which makes life much harder for the person to do a sale. You were not allowed to get that off the shelf because they wanted the salesperson to get your information to do the activation so that they got paid. They made it harder for you so they made more money. That doesn't work. They then made you sign up for a contract so that we got paid back the money that you
Got paid.
paid Best Buy. And then we, now it's $60 a month for 2 years. 22 million sold. I want to see the return rate. I want to see the return rate after month 2 and 3. I want to see the unpaid debt on that. I want to see how those losses are now carried forward. What do we know about these things? Bluetooth took so long to get into these handsets, even though a lot of OEMs thought Bluetooth was going to be great for pairing with other devices in the cars. In North America, we, the carriers, prevented it because we didn't want it on these devices. We wouldn't certify it if it came in with Bluetooth. What do we know about technology? Why should we constrain the evolution of notebooks and say, these apps can't run on this because it'll hurt my network? You get the carrier involved in this too much, and I think it stifles the innovation that could occur. So I just don't believe in that model. And I got to tell you, I spent 4 years. I did the HP deal, the Sony deal, the Dell deal. I've talked to Steve Jobs, to everybody in the industry. I wrote big checks, tens of millions of dollars, paid bounties to lots of different people, hundreds of dollars to my salespeople, Best Buy salespeople with HP. I've done all those deals. They don't work. They're too expensive. And they create artificial activities that are the wrong things.
So, Mark, RIM's a great example of a company kind of like Apple where people go to buy a BlackBerry and the carrier's kind of in the background, right? I mean, it may be.
Well, that's in North America and also in the Western Hemisphere, but in Europe, as you're asking about Europe, it's Carphone Warehouse, huge channel. They know how to do it right. The people are trained. They can get you up and going just like that. Another thing in Europe is that we don't subsidize. Operators don't subsidize in all the countries. It's illegal in, for example, Finland. There's some other operators that just don't subsidize.
You pay because you want that device.
Yeah, and now, of course, the ones that do, they like to subsidy lock these things. And I remember in the 90s, we made a phone that was very easy to change the SIM card. And the operators were like, no, put the SIM card under the battery, glue it in. That would be better to glue it in, because they don't want people to be changing SIM cards. But Europeans are very sophisticated with this stuff. They've got 3, 4, 5 SIM cards. Mm-hmm. And so you have to be able also to deal with that economy.
First of all, I'm glad you corrected me because I only know North America and that industry. But I do want to add one more piece to this. If we, as a carrier, select HP or Sony, and the terms there are lucrative to us, and we're going to get that back out of you, we've immediately killed the opportunity for everybody else. I'm going to spend $450 for a Sony unsubsidized or 1 cent. This is a no-brainer. That stifles competition. I really believe that. I believe it's not in the customer's interest in the long term. It looks great, but
they always go for it.
Just a quick poll in the room. How many people have a mid or something like it as a...
What do you have?
We'll talk offline. I've got an HP. But...
Anybody else have a second or third device besides their phone that they use besides their phone and a laptop? So, interesting. This is a lead user group, so and I hear crickets chirping.
How many people have more than one laptop? How many people have internet connectivity off of a consumer device like their Garmin or their camera? Bluetooth pairing?
Yep.
Refrigerators count too.
Okay.
I have a question back for the group. Well, 2 questions. One is, where does Google play in all of this? They clearly have an OS browser strategy that's pretty aggressive, and they really, they've come at this from a mobile perspective, definitely, as opposed to Microsoft, who's got a lot of baggage on their back. And then the second question is, how important will it be to have this seamless roaming, fixed mobile convergence capability, like Gobi chips, Snapdragon, the ability to roam across WiMAX, LTE, Wi-Fi, 3G? How important is that going to be to stimulate the sales of these devices, to have that capability at a chip level that's affordable? So.
Let me kind of jump into that. There's something I wanted to mention to the group, and that is the LTE versus WiMAX kind of debate. And I think people try to couch. I'm a little off topic, but I wanted to get this information out because people try to make that a VHS versus Betamax kind of debate, and it really isn't that kind of debate because the technology is actually so similar. that if you're an OEM and you're starting down the path of embedding WiMAX today because our network's out there today, the incremental cost for you to change to LTE is much smaller than it's sort of generally perceived. So I'll just leave that out there. It's not an either-or decision, it's an and decision. Every major OEM will have both. It would be stupid not to. So the debate is, it's not as much of a real debate as there's not as much fire as people want to make it.
What about having both in the device?
It's possible.
It's difficult. Well, the major difference between LTE, there's a couple of things. LTE and WiMAX use the same air interface, so OFDM, orthogonal frequency division multiplexing. It's just, like Wi-Fi uses. And that's been around since the 70s. But the key difference is there's two differences. One is that the WiMAX doesn't have a core network. You have to have a custom core network built, which is good and bad, right? And it's good in the sense you can put anything you want. If you're like you guys, you can just put just enough in there, and you don't have to go to the high fixed cost of building out a huge network. The bad side is if you want to emulate a cellular carrier, is that your custom core network probably won't even interoperate with your other side of the core network.
But that's a carrier constraint.
Yeah,
I'm talking about from the OEM's perspective. Let me get back to your question. So I don't think we're that biased. Google has $500 million investment in our company. They're on our board, and we frequently are in communication with them. We're going to be doing an Android device, which is the operating system you're talking about. There was a recent interview. I think Eric Schmidt realizes that they have to get into mobile search. There's about 5 times more mobile devices than there are laptops. So that's a way for him to look at possibly doing a 5X on his business. So they're very focused on this. They put their money where their mouth is, and they're very committed to all these things.
Can I follow up on the network side? This is kind of a specialty of mine. So I have dual mode comes up a lot, and I say, well, what's dual mode? And they mean, 3G and 4G. And I say, okay, great. You want to do 3G and 4G? Do 3G first. They're like, no, I can't do 3G. It's too expensive. I'm like, well, if you can't do 3G, you can't do dual mode. Well, I love the coverage. Well, you think your customer's willing to pay $60, $70, $80? They said no. So let's leave that off. So it really depends on the price point. If we're talking a consumer electronic device under $250, I would say Wi-Fi and WiMAX fit well together. If we're talking $200 to $400 long term, I think we're going to work out some issues related to the chipset. And I would say LTE to 802.16m. Keep in mind, LTE is not a standard in my mind today. It will be in 2012. But we're not going to be 802.16e in 2012. We're going to be 802.16m, 300 megabits per second max speed, 40, 50 megabits per second in the real world. Fast stuff compared to LTE. But at a chipset cost, two things. One, I think that in $200 to $600, manufacturers are probably going to do a combi chipset. So you'll have Wi-Fi in there, you'll have WiMAX and LTE. But to what advantage? Because LTE is going to have the same business case that we are. They're going to go after the same urban centers that we are because of the efficiencies of building out their network. Now, if they built it out in 700 megahertz, there'll be a difference, and there'll be an advantage there. So I would say, look at...
How do you think it would be an advantage at 700 megahertz?
It depends. I think that they're going to be slower, but maybe bigger footprint. So
so there you go.
So to the extent that that's an advantage to a device to have bigger footprint, they might want an LTE in there to get a...
but that just removes the benefit of having high speeds.
Exactly. So what I would say a good fit is WiMAX and GSM, and that's going to freak everybody out when they say, aren't you a Sprint guy? I say, yeah, but the footprint of GSM and the low speed fits nicely between high-speed local Wi-Fi, relatively low-cost GSM, slightly cheaper WiMAX. That's a good pairing for me, and say at 200 to 400.
That's probably an interesting combination because GSM is dirt cheap, and probably October or November of this year we will have 4 billion GSM subscribers globally.
Some of that may
It's not going away. Anytime.
Some of that may play out in Europe because many of the WiMAX trials are driven by the classic carriers too. So like in Italy and Sweden and some other guys. In terms of other questions from the group?
Real quick one. You talked about first about power, right? So power is cheap and playing for a lot more mobile systems, a lot more applications, a lot more. But I don't see the power. It's just incremental improvements. It's not. So is there any investment options, technology for power?
Yeah, I could shed some light on this. This is a major problem for people who make devices. Now, I'm not a battery expert, but I have learned from my people who are battery experts. The battery was invented by a guy named Volta in 1800. So most of the learning, the learning curves, performance curves are kind of like sigmoidal. They're kind of a log logistic curve. And after 200 some odd years, you're talking about 5% per chemistry for given normal chemistry per year capacity increase. But what I didn't know, and this is really interesting, is that you've got to give 2 to 3% back for safety purposes. Because and then I hear a lot of the uninformed analysts, telling me, well, that's only today, but we'll have disruptive technology. But the point is, I'm not going to put a fuel cell in my pocket, and I don't think you would either. So it's not going to be very fast. One day, but not anytime soon.
Nuclear batteries, Mark.
Yeah, there you go. You want one of those in your pocket too.
Solar panels on the back.
Yeah.
That's right.
Carl?
Yeah, Mark, you told me that you were being asked to glue the SIM into the phone at one point by the carriers, but amazingly, you guys actually are the first peer-to-peer that no one ever talks about. But in BlackBerry, there's a user ID that allows us to do BlackBerry Messenger between each other. How in the world did you get that past those guys, and what the hell happened to make that occur?
That was later. That was later. And you can't change it.
You can't.
Can't change it. That's right.
Every time I think about you guys, I think about that option, and it explodes my mind as to the possibility.
Just like the ability to blow away a BlackBerry remotely, right?
Oh yeah, you can. If you lose it, or if I lose this, I'll take. Let's call my assistant. She'll just blow it away.
That's why the police like
Just
it.
blow it away, and it will be erased. It won't be like you could stick it in liquid nitrogen and go give it to some guy in a lab to bit by bit decode it, which is how they do this stuff. It will be gone.
Question over here? Or just a scratch?
Sold for.
Okay, I'm going to throw another one out there that's a little more forward-looking since I'm the scenario planning guy. To what extent does, what do you see as both the biggest revolution that could happen in the next 5 years around the smart device mid-space, and what do you see as the biggest potential threat that could also just stifle its growth? So I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I think the possibilities that are offered by lower price points for consumers could make this a huge category that's not commonly perceived.
So like a Wi-Fi type growth if you could hit it right.
Yeah, and that's going to require low price points. It's going to require, Patrick would probably say $10. I'm thinking more like 15 or 20. These devices will not, one of the definitions that we have of a mid is it's not voice-centric, but people will be running Skype and Skype-like voice applications. So for $15 or $20 a month to have a device you can put in your pocket or your backpack or what have you, that could even include, it could actually be like a WiMAX in or 4G in and Wi-Fi out, so you could enable a lot of their devices with it, or you could use the device alone when you're on, in the car or on the bus or whatever. If that was $20 a month and that device didn't cost any more than $200 or even $150, it would be, in 5 years, it would be, 50 million of those devices. And that would just blow everyone's mind.
All right, so flip it around. I know you're paid to be an optimist, so give me the
well, it just
biggest thing
doesn't
that could
happen.
Stifle the growth. So the cost,
the price
never
points
reach the
don't come
scale.
down. The cover, So my points of view, one of the points of views I have on LTE is that if Clearwire is not successful, we won't see LTE. It is a follower strategy that will only happen if we're successful.
Kind of like satellite and cable, digital cable.
Yeah, so it won't happen unless we're successful. So probably the biggest disaster scenario for the industry, this is all relative, obviously, we're talking about technology adoption here, but is that if we're not successful and we somehow fail over the next 2 or 3 years, that will put mobile broadband probably behind 7 to 10 years in the United States.
These guys will be on the corner with hats and tambourines after the show.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys know this, but you can't do voice over LTE yet, and it was built on a cellular system, kind of. But there's 4 different proposals that no one can agree on. The whole industry can't quite agree on which one to do, so they're now trying to put all of them.
I think we have a few sessions on those, don't we?
Yeah, it's pretty tricky.
Good.
Yeah, there's a lot of internal dissidence with the the LTE crowd, because we very much are okay with voice application, voice over IP. We in fact sell a voice over IP like kind of an Advantage type competitive scenario, and we don't. Our everything we do is very open, like an ISP would be.
I think what you're saying too is one of the options is your option. Just fall back to GSM.
Well, I'll add a little bit more on the LTE thing. A couple of inside baseball things that people aren't aware of. TDD and FDD, and if you don't know what they are, I don't care. It doesn't matter. But one of the things about WiMAX and LTE, they're different, is TDD, FDD. And the consequence is that WiMAX is going to be attractive to people who have bits and pieces of frequencies, okay? Because we can hop back and forth between them, and I'm not going to get technical. LTE works better for somebody who has large blocks of spectrum. Well, I don't even say large, but contiguous spectrum.
Yeah.
Classic carriers who are voice constrained today, who don't want to make this mistake that Sprint made with Nextel. When we bought Nextel, we took the eye off the ball of our core business, voice, and our stock traded from 25 to 2. I know because I bought at 25. So if I'm deploying LTE, I'm going to be a classic carrier with not lots of, but contiguous spectrum. I probably don't have a fraction of what Clearwire has, but that's North America. So I'm probably going to be a classic LTE carrier, concerned about my voice business, and probably not interested in getting into too much broadband that might hurt my voice base. In North America, I'm going to second what he said. If we fail, that's a bad thing. Because our premise here is, like when you first got your cell phone, you didn't know if you needed it. It was $100 a month. It was ridiculous. Now you can't live without it. We're making the same bet that mobile Internet's the same way. At whatever price point, whatever device, whatever applications, that there's a demand for it out there, and that we can recoup our investment. If we fail at this, our new CEO is the former president of Vodafone. He asked his Vodafone operators, his European peers, hey, what's really going to happen with LTE? He goes, look, they said to him, we're still trying to pay the billions of dollars you made us spend to upgrade to 3G here. They said 2014, 2015. It's a follower strategy. If we fail here, two things will happen. One, LTE will slow down. Two, LTE and the carriers will continue to present these rules and things that they have the opportunity to do today. If we break the rules, get away from these app stores and carrier constraints, and demonstrate that you can make money doing that, that's good for the industry.
Okay. Mark, biggest revolution and biggest threat?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think security is still a hugely important aspect.
And do you see if OSs start to converge, does that become a bigger threat, or potentially?
It could, because once you get the privacy and security go together. They're not the same thing. Privacy is, one of the things that GSM did was present privacy. You have the temporary TIMSI, the temporary mobile subscriber ID. You send your IMSI out once, and then the system gives you this TIMSI that keeps changing, so you can't track anybody very easily. You could, but similar things like that. Once I think Scott and I talked to him in the past about location-based services. It's hugely lucrative from a commercial standpoint, but once people can track you, then they can scam you, either physically or whatever. So security is
and that's another one where we probably all need a dose of reality, because a recent survey of the average consumer on LBS, only 25% of people said they'd like their location known for value-added services. Yeah. So it's very much still in the I think the tense mode of figuring out is it a privacy violation or not.
I've been kind of working in that space for a couple years now, on and off, and you're right, that's probably overall general numbers, but among the younger demographic, they're okay with it. They use the services, Looped is an example, Friend Finder. Those are the heavy users of people in college who are the sweet demographic who's going to become old, as they get older. Older people aren't as interested in it. So,
I want to answer the future question, because that's generally where I live. What was interesting was we came up with 3 threats against this, and I agree on the location-based services and the privacy. But to your point, there's going to be third parties that there's value to be connected. I did a couple years working on a doctoral thesis in electronic privacy, so I'm really invested in that. But the challenge is not to give up your privacy. The challenge is to get something in return for it. So I'm just going to point this out. I have, like I said, sat down with CTOs of whether it's Disney, HP, Amazon, talked to all this. At a certain point, you realize everything's going to be connected, which then brings us back to security. If that car is connected, boy, I'm really scared about that. But wow, if everything really is connected, I used to say I've seen everything except for a WiMAX embedded blender, until the largest kitchen appliance company came in with a widget strategy for their bread mixers. It's going to be connected. Maybe not 2011. 2011 is a breakthrough for classic consumer electronics, $200, $300 for mobile internet. But 2012, 2013, 2014, once your meters are smart and you're doing time-of-day pricing at your house and you're uploading your Prius's electricity to the grid based upon where you are and the electricity rates for it at that time, once these things are connected, I literally say it's like having a TV and listening to radio. The question is what the application providers do to step up and take advantage of it. I think it's a brave new world out there, and most people just don't see it coming. I mean, you just don't have the opportunity to sit down with these companies and know where they're making investments 2, 3, and 4 years down the road. When those investments all come together, it's going to be really interesting, scary, but opportunities to add value in really new ways.
And I would say along with security is your single authentication. If you pass from network to network, are you going to have to re-authenticate every time? Probably not. How do you manage that? Across
Federated identity.
That's managed today with 3GPP networks up in the HLR and the VR, the home location register, and visiting. So they know each other. But, yeah, in the future.
Got a question up front here real quick.
I've seen Android actually making a dent in a mobile OS. Do you think Chrome will do the same in the mid-network space?
Well, Chrome's going to replace Android effectively, right?
I'm not the right guy for that.
I think it's too early to say.
I mean, I think Google's strategy is that Chrome envelopes Android eventually, right? So,
I think for mobile devices it may be an overkill, SaaS and so on. Probably you still need an Android OS.
but I think Google's recent announcement says you got it's the Chrome OS now. It's not just the Chrome browser. It's Chrome is the whole thing. Okay, I thought they were pushing it down to mobiles as well, but I don't know.
I can't really comment further than that.
Yeah. Okay. Question in the back.
If everything is going to be connected, are we going to solve the addressing issue?
Easy answer. Cisco would say IPv6 solves it, and that's why they're saying that the sky is falling. But I think that I'm like one of these optimists that, like with global warming, I think technology will get solved. There's ways of solving a lot of these things. I don't know how. V6 is a big step in the right direction.
Well, I mean, LTE is based on V6. I don't know that you could go backwards if that goes forward, and WiMAX has a little more flexibility.
You can go backwards.
Yeah, there's some ways to build in that are creative.
But I think the point of addressing is we're closing in on that. That is a big issue. You're right,
Yeah.
and it should be watched, especially when you get into sensor networks and objects. Okay, we are winding down here. Probably have time for one more question.
Just a clarification, you said Google Talk, you meant Google Voice? Google Talk?
Sorry, yeah.
Google Talk.
Google Talk is what I meant. The phone number that can float across device to device, and you can have all your.
That came out of Grand Junction.
Well, we can talk offline.
Okay.
Google Voice is a different service than Google Talk.
Yeah, I meant the phone number one. I'm sorry if I put the wrong one.
Okay.
I meant Google Voice probably.
I think we're going to have some of the materials available online, and I guess thanks for your participation and interactive discussion. This is a hot topic, so we should all be monitoring it and watching Carl's blog on the topic as well. And I want to thank the panelists for a great discussion.
I do want to catch up with you later. Some ideas, one about.